number 10, guys, the number 10 tip. And again, they're not in any particular order, but it is the one I decided I really wanted to finish on. The number 10 tip for expanding your connections, or networking, as we may or may not call it, is don't be afraid of rejection. Okay? For me personally, this is still one of the things that I have an unnatural level of, I won't say fear, what's the word, anxiety about. And that is, I still hate going through, I feel sick in the stomach sometimes when I have to kind of make these sort of connections with people. I go, oh, you know, and it's almost never because I think they're not going to want to talk to me. There's just something primal. Okay, somewhere in my psyche, I don't know, maybe when I was 5, you know, I went to pat a dog and it bit me. I don't know what it is, right? But there's something that I have this huge resistance to doing certain things. And I know that fear of rejection is one of people's greatest fears. I mean, I think there's this, you know, sort of chart that they did once where, you know, people are more afraid of public speaking than they are of death, and, you know, all these sorts of crazy things. But certainly fear of rejection, fear of, you know, oh my God, how do I just go up to these people and, you know, the worst, what's the worst that can happen? Seriously, the worst can happen is that they tell you to bugger off. And if they tell you to bugger off, then bugger them. Right? You don't want to be friends with people like that or make a connection with someone, or shit, you don't even want to work for them probably. So if you handle your approach and your, you know, I don't know, insertion point into a conversation, or your, you know, how you first make contact with someone, if you handle that with a level of thoughtfulness, what's the worst that can happen? They're not going to yell at you or punch you, or and if they do, like I say, maybe the punch thing's bad, but you know, if you do get that rejection, then take that as a piece of positive feedback about the kind of person they are and what connection you do or don't want to have with them down the track. Now keep in mind, maybe it's a really bad day, you know, and you just happen to get them at a bad moment, or, you know, just happen to be, you know, saying something in the conversation they were in, and you know, it was a really inopportune time. So maybe don't judge too quickly. But like I say, the worst that can happen is that someone can say no. And they might say it a bit more colourfully than that, or, you know, I don't know. I can't even see that happening, to be honest. Most of the stuff is our own stuff that stops us going up and doing that. And I won't pretend there's not a bit of art to making a connection with someone. Okay, and that's where having a, you know, a wingman or some other way in, or getting one of those other people to introduce you can help. But always keep in mind, anytime you have that reluctance or that resistance, try and ask yourself a few questions about what that resistance is from, or why you have that resistance. Because sometimes when you actually interrogate yourself, you realize that it's actually kind of absurd. You know, that the fear that you have is, you know, what is it? FEAR, right? False evidence appearing real, or false evidence appears real, or yeah, it's one of those things, right? And that's, sometimes fear is really useful, right? So if you're about to cross a busy road and there's cars going everywhere and you go, oh my God, I have to get across, that fear can be useful because it can stop you just walking out and bam, right? Or, you know, if there's a wild animal or something like that, fear can be useful, but it can also be completely sort of, I don't know, irrelevant and destructive, and I don't even know how to, you know, it can just be irrelevant. And so the fear of going up and introducing to someone, I'm like, you know, what is there to be afraid of? And that doesn't mean I don't acknowledge that it feels real and that you have to work through that. But, you know, you have to work through it. That's the reality. And unless you're going to work in, I don't know, a morgue or somewhere, chances are you're going to be dealing with real people. So at some point, you have to work on that skill. And maybe working on that skill now when you're looking for your next boss, your next job, however you want to word it, maybe that's not a bad time to do it. And always keep in mind, you know, anytime I'm making one of these decisions, nothing to do with job hunting necessarily, it's always you think, okay, how good could this go? And then you always measure the downside. You know, if I'm trying to do something, what's the worst that can happen? And I'm not being pessimistic, because I'm also thinking about what's the best that can happen. And in this sort of, you know, building your connections situation, what's the best that could happen is I could get my dream job. What's the worst that could happen is they're going to ignore me or tell me to bugger off. I mean, on the scale of things, you know, the upside is so much bigger than the downside. If the downside is they might turn around and shoot me in the head, then, you know, maybe rethink that. And if you're looking to make connections in those sorts of places where that's a possibility, don't go to those sorts of places, right? Go somewhere else. But for most of us, the downside is minimal and the upside is astronomically more, you know, attractive and positive and, you know, desirable. So that's my final thought for all these tips that I've given you, is that think rationally about the downside. Think rationally about the fear and the fear of rejection and, you know, that reluctance to do that. You don't have to be cocky about it. Find your Beyonce, your Sasha Fierce, you know, find that bit inside you that goes, right, I'm just going to act like a person who doesn't care if I get rejected here. And chances are they're never going to, you know, even if you make a complete and utter fool of yourself, chances are they're not going to remember you. If you do it significantly enough, they'll probably remember you. You know, you'll be the guy that, you know, or the girl that, you know, did something really ridiculous and stupid, right? And they'll go, you know. But for most of us, the worst that's going to happen is you're going to interrupt, or you're going to make a connection, or you're going to try and make a connection, and it's going to be inconvenient for someone else. And that's it. You might remember it, but they never will. Especially if you're polite and thoughtful about it. So, you know, be rational about what this reluctance is, what this fear of rejection is. And I know that some of you will be thinking, oh my God, now he sounds like one of those, you know, TV evangelists and blah, 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 and all that sort of stuff. And maybe I do. But I also happen to be really passionate about this one. Okay? Because when you get your job, you're going to have to be brave. In life, you're going to have to be brave. There's going to be all kinds of situations where you're just going to have a go, knowing that there's a chance it won't work out how you planned. And you know what? It usually won't work out how you planned. Sometimes it'll work out better. Sometimes it will work out worse. And very rarely will it ever work out exactly like you thought it would. So get used to it. You know, if you, depending on what age you are now, maybe you've already learned that lesson. There's a great saying that I have, and I didn't make it up, but I use it all the time, and it says, how do you make God laugh? Tell him your plans. You know, because what you think is going to happen and what actually happens, almost never the same thing. So go up and make these connections and find your next boss. I hope some of this has been useful. I've put a lot of my own energy into it and my own thoughts. I'm sure there's 1,000 other tips that I could have given you. Maybe there's some tips that people don't agree with, or, you know, think, you know, could be a little bit different. That's fine. If this has just made you think about ways that you can find your next boss, which will lead to you finding your next job, then hopefully if I've contributed in some small way, then that's fantastic. So get out there and go hunting, whether it's for a job or a boss or whatever else is you're hunting, as long as it's not like giraffes and lions and, you know, vulnerable animals. You know, good luck with all that. So happy hunting.